Welcome to the Heart of CIRS podcast. I'm your hostess, Melanie Joy Pensack, here to share heartfelt conversations with folks recovering from CIRS and with those special people serving the CIRS community. The podcast was created to help bring awareness to the physical, emotional, and mental experiences of folks navigating CIRS day to day. The world needs to know what CIRS folks go through for deeper empathy and understanding. Through stories and vulnerability, we can help the world understand the winding journey of CIRS recovery. Thank you for being here to open your mind and to open your heart. I'm delighted today to have Morgan Glodowski on the Heart of CIRS podcast. Let me tell you about the amazing work Morgan is doing with the CIRS community. Morgan is a multimodality integrative health practitioner and owner of Moksha Embodied, where she utilizes holistic protocols and somatic and spiritual healing practices to help individuals self-liberate from suffering, get to the root of their symptoms, and rewire their subconscious to break the mold of their condition. As an overcomer of CIRS and biotoxin illness herself, Morgan is on a mission to inspire and educate patients and practitioners on the power of breathwork specifically, a missing modality in medicine and mold recovery. Thank you so much, Morgan, for bringing together this work of spirituality and science. I know this is something that we both feel really strongly about, and welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you for your work and also inviting me on here today. I'm very much looking forward to this very important and intentional conversation.
I love how in your bio you say that you're a CIRS overcomer. So many of us strive to be a CIRS overcomer, and it feels like such a beautiful thing to hear. I know folks want to hear from people who have gone through the process and feel like they've come out the other side. So I was wondering if you could start out by sharing briefly some points around how you developed CIRS and the trajectory of your recovery.
Absolutely. It's funny, I've always been someone that valued my health even before getting sick. So those of you who know what CIRS is or have struggled with CIRS yourself, it feels like you're on a hamster wheel chasing maybe the health that you had before or the health you desire. Prior to getting sick, I was really involved in the fitness industry and had no real health issues at all. It blindsided me a little bit. I maybe caught the flu like once every 3 years. For me, my health took a nosedive in 2021. Almost immediately after moving into a new apartment. And I remember for the longest time, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I come from a medical background myself, and I knew my labs frequently passed their standards and understanding with flying colors. I knew my problem was much deeper than that and probably what the average physician or even specialist could offer me. And it was at that point I had opted to do some functional testing and lab work and discovered that a lot of my issues were being caused by toxic black mold. Of course, toxic black mold that I could not see in my pristine white walled apartment, or so I thought. And I really didn't know I had CIRS after I knew that I had mold toxicity. I didn't find out I had CIRS till about 9 months after initially moving into this apartment. And I'd actually been out of the apartment for 3 months at the time, thinking if I just moved and left all my things behind, which I made the decision to do, that I wouldn't risk contaminating my new living environment and I could heal. It was a lot harder than just leaving the source of exposure for me because I had Marcons, and with that biofilm in the nasal cavity, you don't really leave the exposure despite finding a new place to live and replacing material possessions. So as far as where I am now, as you said, I do like to refer to myself as an overcomer. It's not that I don't still have flares in the event of a re-exposure. But for me, it's an intention and it's a mindset. I would rather view myself and my circumstances as being able to overcome them rather than being limited by them. It's been about 2.5 years since moving out of that apartment for me. I have been through the shoemaker protocol. I've recently weaned off of VIP. So next step for me is actually retesting Marcons to see if it has gone from my nasal cavity, and then also getting another neuroquant to see if my brain has returned to normal. I very much had a CIRS brain in the sense that several structures were inflamed and several structures were actually atrophied as of last fall.
It's inspiring to hear how far you've come, and I hope that your neuroquant shows you some great results. I had to do my follow-up neuroquant after a year on VIP, and it was exciting to see changes, to really see that on paper, how the brain can change and gray matter can grow. We're very lucky that we get to be able to recover our brain going through the shoemaker protocol.
I love hearing that and that you are able to see those improvements. I think we so often forget just what our body and our brain is really capable of. There's a lot of fear. I don't know about you when you got your first neuroquant back, but it's hard to believe your brain can be affected to that extent by mold or whatever your source of exposure was, but also the way that it can bounce back with the right protocol and things like that is really hopeful.
I still have some work to do based on my neuroquant, even though there were a lot of positive changes. I had a very severe CIRS presentation, critically ill, and I'll probably be somebody that has to be on vasoactive intestinal peptide, the nasal spray, which is the last step in the shoemaker protocol. I'll probably have to be on that for a couple years. But I knew that going into it, and still seeing that there were those positive shifts was empowering.
Yeah, definitely helps you stay the course.
When you go through CIRS, how did you lean into your spirituality? And what does that really mean to you? A lot of the people that I talk to and work with, they have times where they feel very challenged, and then times where they feel really strengthened by their spiritual belief. I'm curious, how did that show up for you along the way?
I love this question. For me, spirituality is very much just a part of my life. I think my journey with CIRS actually heightened that. I believe you can make about anything spiritual. I don't view spirituality exclusive to any one religion, just more so an overarching concept. In my experience, spirituality strengthened my CIRS recovery. And I also feel like my CIRS recovery has strengthened some of my spiritual gifts. And to me, mold symbolizes the dark and often unseen. So I almost view it as an entity, and in that way it can attack and threaten our consciousness and our life force. And I do feel, I don't know about you, but I was extremely depressed, and that's actually often one of my first symptoms that I am in an exposure. I will have very dark thoughts that are not myself. I know that they're not coming from me per se. And I think when we really break it down and look at what the role of mold is in our ecosystem, it exists to decompose dead organic matter and then return it back to the soil. And I think there's obviously a lot that can be dissected with that, but in short, finding strengthening and utilizing your life force or my life force was a really big key to overcoming mold and kind of a spiritual attack that it is, or that it at least looking at the history and how mycotoxins were used as bioweapons, it really is that big of a deal. There's obviously reasons that modern medicine and our government isn't educated on it and doesn't talk about it a whole lot. But for me, my journey with CIRS has provided opportunities for healing that go beyond the physical body. It gave me the opportunity to heal mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. And I think people who can't in some form see their struggle as a gift or as a deeper calling, unfortunately, are the ones who seem to infinitely suffer. I don't mean that in a sense of, oh, what happened to us was so great, but we can use really unfortunate circumstances and like squeeze greatness out of it.
I relate to so much of what you're saying. In my own experience, I was very uncharacteristically despairing at the most intense period of my CIRS. I don't typically have that demeanor, and I had overwhelming tears and felt very hopeless, which is very counter to how I've shown up in the world previously. So that was really unnerving. And my meditation practice, it helped me to see through the thoughts and the feelings and helped me to tap into there is something going on here. These thoughts, these emotions are not really all of who I am. They're not me, but there's something that's happening right now in my experience. It really did force me to go deep and go inward, as you are touching on, to believe that there was a part of me that was still able to be in touch with my body and in touch with this truer part of myself. The illness really also forced me to reckon with all of the emotions and issues that I've been suppressing and been able to work through or get past in my life or thought that I had. It's almost like when I went through CIRS, all of the coping mechanisms that I had, I couldn't keep up with that anymore. All of the traumas I had suppressed and all of the emotions and people that I didn't want to deal with that I just kept pushing to the side, everything blew up in my face because I didn't have the mental abilities to suppress it. And so I was forced to deal with it. It was like, okay, all of these things are here. How are you going to work through this person that you haven't forgiven or this pattern that you have that's really unhealthy? And you don't have anything else to do but lay in bed. So you're going to see it and work through it. It was dark and it was heavy. And I felt like I was swimming in like a black hole at times.
Yeah.
It's like I couldn't not see all of the unhelpful habits that I had developed in my life, mentally and emotionally. It forced me to really reckon and deal with them.
I resonate with that so much. I know I myself was a very big, kept myself busy. I kept myself distracted. I was very avoidant, and CIRS, like you said, really took away some of those coping mechanisms. And for the better, honestly, I was forced to look at some things and deal with some things in a new and healthier way than just constantly running from it. When you are bedbound, there's no more running from things typically.
Yeah. It forced me to really feel into what spirituality meant for me. Like I typically practice meditation in the Buddha Dharma world, insight, Vipassana meditation, but I'm very connected to earth-based practices and nature in general. I feel like that is my biggest teacher, is the natural world. And unexpectedly, I felt in the moments when there was no one around who could really listen to me or support me or help guide me through the unknown, I called upon my ancestors and I really started to speak out loud to them and felt very connected to the people of the past who had gone through difficulties and had survived. I felt like I didn't know who those people were, but these are the people that I need, the ones that have been through the shitstorm and they survived enough to the point that I'm eventually alive. I need their strength and their guidance. I really feel strongly like my ancestors have been an ally along the way, which was an unexpected domain for my spiritual beliefs.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think in my experience, like they show up for us when we need it. So I think sometimes maybe there isn't always that intention there, and then it just happens and it's very aligned and helpful.
What you said too about folks who go inward and start to find something, whatever spiritual subscription you subscribe to, whatever religion or belief system that is, folks that do lean into that seem to fare better with the emotional, mental ups and downs of going through the recovery process, I see as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to bring up the post that you posted on Instagram that is the reason that I originally reached out to Morgan. I think will be a great segue into the next part of our conversation. I was admiring the work that you were doing in general, Morgan. She did a CIRSx talk, bringing in breathwork at the most recent National CIRS conference. That was exciting to see that show up and to hear her talk about that. And then she posted this, and I was like, oh, I got to talk to her. So this is her post. It says, unpopular opinion in the holistic space. Every health issue is not a subconscious story or limiting belief, and perpetuating this narrative is harmful. Anxiety, depression, overwhelm, victim consciousness, mood swings, difficulty concentrating, sleep problems, intrusive thoughts, etc., can all have very real and physical underlying root causes. Saying someone's health issues are a result of a deep-rooted mindset issue or trauma response is 100% gaslighting, and you are a part of the problem. There is a lot to unpack with that Instagram post, but I very much resonated, and I wanted to open up the conversation now into what I almost feel is the public service announcement for people in the healing arts world. I hope that they'll hear all of this and take it to heart. But what do you want to say so we can get into this part of the conversation?
This is one, and I'm sure you agree, Melanie, just it's needed to have been talked about for some time. I think now more than ever, spirituality and a lot of these modalities and almost belief systems have become quite trendy. I think sometimes with that, there's maybe a lack of understanding on some levels, and also a lot of these harmful narratives have been pushed and perpetuated. And is trauma and unintegrated emotions likely going to come up in a journey to overcoming chronic illness? Absolutely. But for those people who are chasing this level of healing, like a hamster on a wheel trying to make progress and they're not, it's likely that they're either getting somatically re-traumatized by either inappropriate titration with these modalities or unexperienced or unqualified practitioners, and that's why they're stuck, or there's something much deeper going on, which unfortunately is the case of many people with CIRS. The best way I can explain it is if your immune system is stuck, your nervous system is going to be stuck. And until you can modulate one, it's very hard to modulate the other. And as we know, those with CIRS have a very difficult time modulating and turning off their immune system. And their nervous system is often pretty dysregulated by default. It's one of those chicken versus the egg scenarios in which came first. But in the event with CIRS, it doesn't really matter because we have to get both on board for their progress to really be made at all. I see a lot of these examples and maybe this narrative being overly pushed, claiming it's all trauma or some limiting belief or unprocessed emotion, that they need more self-love on social media and even within certain healing or coaching containers. Although I do know a couple of shamans personally who've dedicated their life to this kind of work, and they still struggle because the people around them aren't educated on the effects of toxic mold on the immune system of those with genetically susceptible haplotypes. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter how much breathing you do. Here I am, it's half my business, but it doesn't matter how much breathing you do, how much tapping, how much ayahuasca, whatever your modality of choice is. If you're living in an environment that is physically killing you and causing your brain to degenerate, you're not going to make progress.
Thank you so much for articulating that so beautifully. I know on my own journey, before I knew about CIRS, when my health was questionable, where I was pre-CIRS, in and out of mold, surviving and getting through, and knowing that my body wasn't really functioning to its fullest capacity, I really started to explore more of the healing art modalities. It's really easy to fall into this idea that everything is rooted in some sort of unresolved trauma or emotional issue that I have, right? Because the doctors can't find anything wrong with me. So when the Western allopathic physicians could not identify anything in blood work, anything in GI testing that would point to a reason I felt unwell. The only thing I had to fall back on was then, well, I'm hearing this narrative. It must be the trauma. It must be something emotional. I remember somebody, one of the coaches I was even working with, saying, it sounds like maybe you were abused as a child. Do you remember any abuse? And I was so taken aback. And then I was really trying to remember, maybe is there something that is suppressed that I don't know? Because you look at these people as people who are further along in their spirituality or in the healing arts in some way. So you respect, what they're noticing and what they're intuiting, right? And I thought maybe I need to meditate on this and explore if there was something. Maybe that's the root cause of all of this, right? And so pretty quickly, through my own meditation and insight, realized this is not me. That is not something that happened to me. And I felt angry at that practitioner. And I think about people that don't necessarily maybe self-reflect in that way, how they could then take that on and believe that kind of story, right? Because that practitioner planted that seed in me. And that can be very harmful. If a Reiki practitioner or any of the other healing arts folks are saying, yeah, you just need to do more yoga, or you just need to keep going with the breath work or even the meditation, right? So any of that, if they are pointing people away from the possibility that it could be something medical, people don't know any better. And so that's the path that they follow. And it can really cause a lot of self-blame. I was starting to think there's something inside of me that's wrong with me. Then I have to get whatever it is out of me. And I was really exploring that to a point that it was probably borderline unhealthy. Now, knowing what I know about CIRS, that was an underlying mechanism that was going on all along the way. That was a piece of it. I certainly don't want to blame any practitioners because people only know what they know. But I know you are passionate about this, and I am too. I think if the wellness world, Buddha Dharma, meditation teachers, yoga practitioners, Reiki, shamanic, breathwork, healing arts communities in general, if they just had some awareness of this illness, they could actually be pointing people to it because they might notice the person they're working with is not getting better. When you have that client or that patient or that person that keeps coming back and is still depressed, or they're doing deep shadow work and they still don't feel resolved psychologically, or they're having physical symptoms, they feel like they love themselves, but they're still feeling really depressed or even suicidal. There's something else going on there.
Melanie, I just want to say thank you for sharing that story, because that story is unfortunately one that I hear all too often. And I think it just highlights another issue or another gap oftentimes in the healing arts space and even the therapy space. I've seen licensed professionals violate boundaries and in such a way, and trauma-informed people not understand. It's like we almost forget the wisdom that our body holds, and it's never appropriate to try to ask someone to recall a memory that has been unconsciously suppressed for a reason. Now, if it were to come up on its own, absolutely, there's tools and things to support that. But oftentimes, as you touched on, it can be very harmful to someone, especially if they have experienced that trauma and were pushed in such a way that it came up prematurely. Oftentimes, I think what we forget with people who have experienced such trauma, a lot of that trauma is relational. Oftentimes when you cross that boundary as a practitioner, that is what I meant in my post of being another thing that an individual has to heal from, because it's very easy in those circumstances to re-traumatize somebody relationally in that way, especially when there is some sort of power dynamic involved, unfortunately.
What messages or red flags would you want wellness professionals to be aware of?
For the case of CIRS, I think more healing arts professionals and even physicians who maybe aren't super well versed in CIRS, understanding that 20 plus symptoms or multiple autoimmune diagnoses in a single individual is a huge huge red flag and an opportunity to maybe ask some deeper questions related to health history, environment history. You don't have to be even a medical professional to go online and do a quick Google search of CIRS symptom clusters, and you just see how many categories someone that you're supporting falls into, and encourage them to maybe look into it themselves or at least test their body or their home for mycotoxins, knowing that it is 100% possible for an individual to be the only one in a household or in a family struggling with symptoms. Someone can have CIRS when everyone around them remains asymptomatic, and it's not because it's all in their head. It's not because they're crazy. Again, it's just because 25% of the population is genetically susceptible, and oftentimes it is only one, maybe two members of a family or in a household that are affected.
In the meditation world, it's really common for people to come and sit together in meditation groups and community. Then as you go through meditation practice, to occasionally meet with a teacher as you want to deepen your practice or when content comes up in your meditation. So what you were pointing to earlier, how trauma or past memories just naturally come up when they're ready to come up. Sometimes when people meditate more regularly or as they continue to practice over the years, it can be surprising when they have these past memories come up. So they often will reach out to a teacher or somebody to talk about that. Sometimes they're just meeting with patients or with students to occasionally check in and to help keep the student motivated to practice. Oftentimes, it just naturally comes up in conversation. How are you doing? What's going on in your life? Like that all relates to spiritual life, right? It's not separate. Your life is life. I know in my own experience, I found that I was sharing with some of my teachers, like I have been sick for a while or haven't been feeling good. This is how I'm trying to work with the feelings or the emotions and the thoughts around that because it's very intricately related. They certainly knew nothing about CIRS. So I don't blame them for not pointing me in that direction. But I think if one of my meditation teachers across 2 or 3 years had known about CIRS, how powerful that would have been for them to say, look, Melanie, you're sharing with me, you're having concerns with your health. I'm noticing that it's affecting like multiple parts of your life and you're having multiple symptoms. Have you ever heard of this thing, CIRS? Are you being exposed to mold? Something like that, how that would have really changed the trajectory. So I really hope that meditation teachers that are meeting with people and counseling in different ways, that they start to pay attention to what CIRS is and is what you described, even just knowing that 25% of the population is genetically susceptible to this. That's really powerful information to give to someone to be able to just move them in the right direction. I think every professional should know how to refer and how to point out some red flags of the illness so that they can help the people that they're working with, because ultimately people want to be relieved of their suffering. And in the Buddha Dharma world, that's one of the basics of Buddhism, right? There is suffering and there's an end to suffering as we work with our emotions and mental habits and things. My suspicion is that many of the teachers are hearing these stories, and this is happening a lot, that they could be people that could help be screeners and point people in the right direction.
Absolutely. I think a lot of healing arts practitioners and spiritual mentors don't even realize that they're probably actually on the front line of a lot of this stuff, because I can't speak for everyone. I can imagine, because I know it was that way for me, but my illness with CIRS was a spiritual awakening in and of itself.
Yeah.
It was actually a near-death experience for me. And I do think that it was that near-death experience, like I mentioned back, that maybe awakened a lot of my spiritual gifts. These people, not only are they sick and struggling, but they're often developing or noticing an influx of other gifts that maybe they don't know how to integrate, and then they feel even crazier. So I think it is absolutely going to be common, especially as we see numbers with CIRS diagnosis increasing, that a lot of these people are going to actually resort to spiritual spaces first before they get the medical attention that they need. So yeah, I would love to be able to see more people in this spiritual space actually knowing how to screen and discern what is spiritual and what is actually very physical and illness oriented.
Yeah, I agree with you. My experience was also awakening different areas of my psychic abilities. In my own experience, just the ability to be present really allowed me to receive a lot of different information. I love what you're pointing to, that people who are going to spiritual counsel to learn more about their own gifts or learning about shadow work or how to energetically work in different ways, they are probably seeing this, as you pointed to.
Yeah.
Are there any stories that you want to share without saying names of people that you work with or people that you know that have had any experiences in the spiritual world to help red flag for people?
Yeah, share with myself. I've seen a lot of things with myself, ironically, in clientele I support. But for me, it was like that opened up a lot of my stored away mediumship abilities. And so all of a sudden getting sick and almost crossing over myself, I noticed after that point, I was very easily able to cross over and communicate with those that have passed, and a lot of communication with animals and trees, even that feathers. There's just a lot of things I think the universe or the divine, the creator, however anyone refer to it, sends us signs. For me, that was a very big thing. And I think when you are struggling like with a very real physical illness, and then all these spiritual things open up on side of it, you're almost afraid to talk about it because you go and it's so interesting. And I think I needed to have the experience previously, but I used to actually work in mental health for a period of time as a nurse. And of course, I have the insight of, okay, if I tell people I'm experiencing these things, what they're reasonably going to assume. It's very interesting. In any other indigenous culture, we seem to be the only ones who see a lot of that stuff as an illness rather than a gift. But I also do think illness is a way that a lot of people awaken. And I think sometimes they get put in the wrong or the incorrect boat and get terribly misdiagnosed or misjudged when really it's a toxic exposure, some trauma they need to work through, likely, and then a spiritual waking on top of it. That's a lot to integrate for one person. I'll say for me, none of my experiences ever scared me. They were always very beautiful, but I have had some clients who have seen some paranormal things or things maybe of another realm and were very, very scared by that and then needed some support and deeper understanding and working through, because it can be very dysregulating, I think, in itself when it's just happening maybe without an intention of it happening.
Thank you for being vulnerable to share that about yourself. I'm glad that people are feeling like they can come to you and share those things, because going through this illness, when there is so much nervous system dysregulation and you're clearing so many patterns, it's not always roses. It's not always fun. It's energetically exhausting and it's clearing, and it takes a lot out of you emotionally before it is all integrated. So I'm glad that people can talk to you about those things.
Yeah. I think an important piece of it too is oftentimes the big need for support and often the lack of it in navigating illness along with the spiritual side of things, similar to you and the experiences and the relationship you developed with consciousness. For me, one example would be I would see red cardinals a lot, but anytime I had seen one that was dead cross my path, it usually meant that within a week, someone close to me or that I knew was going to pass and needed help delivering a message to another loved one crossing over. It's never failed. That's been the scenario, but it's also it's a it's a blessing, but it's also a little bit of a burden. And then just have an inner knowing that it was soon going to be someone's time and that you were going to be responsible for. That's always hard. How do I tell people this that was going to be comforting and not scary? So far, it's been very well received again, because I think when it is real and it's coming from a place of love and light and a power beyond you, but it's been very interesting navigating that. I do remember for the longest time being super scared and not knowing how to navigate it, fearing that I would be rejected or unsupported by people around me.
It's so great to normalize this. I think about one of the most engaged meditation classes that I taught for meditation for CIRS was about befriending a tree. It was really interesting to me because that topic really opened up a conversation that lasted like well beyond the assigned time of the session, where I was sharing about my relationship with a tree and communication I was receiving from that tree being. Just speaking about that seemed to normalize this as something, as a possibility that other people could also share. I think people have these experiences, and then if they don't have somewhere they can share them or they're not validated, they blow it off. It's almost like a missed opportunity to develop your own relationship with something bigger than yourself.
I want to say this for people who may be listening and are like, I've never had that experience. For me, it's like any time that it's happened, I haven't necessarily sought it out. I've just remained in a neutral space of openness. I don't know how you would refer to that to your meditation clients, Melanie, but trees want to talk to us. These like people, consciousness, things, our ancestors, like they want to communicate with us. A lot of times people have just shut the door on them. What really takes is just being willing to crack it a little bit and letting what's meant to come through.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the way you've described that. I often just find when people are truly present, they're in a place of curiosity and openness, that the possibility for that to happen is more likely if it's meant to. Our society programs us to believe that's not possible. Our modern day society, not the indigenous wisdom by any means, but we live in a world where that's not talked about regularly and modeled, so people don't necessarily even remember that it's a possibility.
Very well said. I wish that more people saw the CIRS label or diagnosis not as a life sentence or an incurable autoimmune condition, but rather an invitation for deeper healing than they can probably even imagine possible for them right now. Because I really do think that it is an invitation, like I touched on earlier, it's not even an invitation for only physical healing, but on all realms if they are open and, like we said, desire.
There's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. It can be a great teacher. Couple CIRS questions before we wrap up. If you could have one magic wish granted, what would you ask to happen within the CIRS community specifically?
Would wish for more people to realize that when they choose the healing for themselves, they are unconsciously giving evidence of what is possible for someone else who is sick and lacking hope. I don't know if you can remember back to how you felt in the time you were deeply struggling, but I certainly can. And I really didn't know if I would make it to live tomorrow or make it to where I am today as far as being able to get rid of most of the symptoms and things like that. And I think that's what kept me going a lot of the times. I think if they can find something to hold on to, that is a lot of times the momentum that you need. And when you can find that momentum for yourself, you often, like I said, unconsciously give that momentum to someone else without knowing.
What keeps you most hopeful day to day?
I think similar to what I said, but more of a spin-off of it. What kept me hopeful is knowing that healing is my birthright and people overcome adversity every day and they're no more special than I am and I'm no more special than anybody else. So it's their for all of us. Again, it's a choice, but it's more of a consistent and conscious choice.
Tell folks how they can stay in touch with you and the work that you are doing with people one-on-one.
Anyone can get in touch with me through my website, mokshaembodied.com, or through my Instagram at Morgan E. Glodowski. I do answer and respond to all of my DMs. But as far as working with me, I offer one-on-one integrative health coaching that also incorporates the trauma-informed Kundalini and somatic release breathwork journeys to help people overcome CIRS. I also offer one-on-one breathwork sessions to those outside of my coaching container with some group programs to be coming soon. If any of that is calling to anyone or you're curious, you can just head over to my website and get in touch with me. I would be happy to talk more with you.
What would be your ideal client?
My ideal client would be somebody who has already chosen healing for themselves and they just need a little bit of guidance how to do that physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I can help from anything from functional labs to the esoteric realm of things, and also how to safely remediate and clean items if mold is an issue for you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. I really appreciate you being here today. I'm so glad that you are still with us and that you're thriving and turning your pain into a passion to help others in the community, helping people step by step. Look forward to all the work that you're bringing into the community in years to come. And thank you again for being here, everybody. Thank you for listening and for your kind attention. To keep in touch, follow the Heart of CIRS podcast on Instagram. You can visit melaniepensack.com/the Heart of CIRS to donate. Your generosity helps to keep this podcast growing. May the awareness of CIRS spread far and wide, helping to change millions of lives for the better.